some of us, we get, I know we get accustomed to just taking for granted all kinds of things. You know, after we've been in the world, as long as many of us have been in the world, we just, things happen, they've always happened, they've always been that way, and we just kind of accept it and we move on. The problem is when we're challenged on those things, we don't instinctively know how to react because we haven't even thought about it. We haven't thought about how to do it. We just do. So today, we're going to, as we look at the section on faithfully different thinking, we're going to talk about reclaiming what belongs to a biblical worldview. Okay? The fact that we have a biblical worldview, there are certain things, the author used the term box. There are certain things that go into that worldview box that we have taken for granted for decades, for centuries. And as the world, anyone outside of a biblical worldview, as the world then builds their worldview, they borrow from our box of beliefs and values. Just kind of pick and choose, so to speak. And the fact that they kind of pick and choose out of the biblical worldview, and they don't even realize it. So for us, we're going to realize, we're going to think, and we're going to justify, or the term is apologetics, right? That's, how I can really definitively decide that my worldview is the biblical worldview is correct. And it's not correct because mom and dad said so, grandma and granddad said so, or the preacher said so. It's because there are logical reasons to justify our biblical worldview. Now, if there is no God, so we take for granted God. Those outside the biblical worldview, if they believe in a deity, they don't give it any authority or any jurisdiction in life. So if there's no God, nothing exists outside of nature, then we have to explain the natural world, explain everything by natural causes. Everything happened within the box of nature. Nearly everyone in culture, including atheists, takes for granted the existence, the definition, and positiveness of things like morality, equality, human equality. Thank you, Rosie. Human rights, freedom, love, justice. Okay? Anyone outside of a biblical worldview, they look at the values that make up those, or they look at the justification that makes up those values. Any worldview where the ultimate authority is the individual, in other words, if those that have a worldview, of course, everything comes down to the self. It comes down to the individual. Any worldview where the ultimate authority is the individual will lack the objective basis for defining and defending some of humanity's most cherished values: freedom, morality, human rights, love, justice. What defines that? I hate to think here in this room, and if we take God out of the equation, how do we define morality? I mean, the 25 of us that are sitting here, we could probably come up with 25 or 30 different bases or fundamentals for things like morality, equality, human rights, freedom. A biblical worldview, on the other hand, provides an objective basis for all of them. God. Okay? We, with the biblical worldview, can say our morality defined by God. Human equality defined by God. Human rights defined by God. Freedom, love, justice. God defines that for us. So we don't have to make up a source. We don't have to try to find a source. We trust that there's a God who has defined it, and thus we follow it. Easy, right? We take it for granted. Those without a biblical worldview, they don't take those things for granted. They try to define it themselves. And that's what we're going to talk about today as we go through some examples. So I want to ask you a question. How would you respond to this statement? Someone you love, someone you care about, someone you met says, I don't need to believe in God to know right from wrong. How would you respond to that? I don't need God to tell me what's right and wrong.
Tad true.
Okay?
But it goes back to God. God put that in us.
Were you reading my notes this morning?
But maybe I should. And it would still vary based on what we wanted per se. Some of that's just inherent.
Okay. Any rebuttals? Any other thoughts? Do I have someone who says, I don't need to believe in God to know right from wrong? Judgment.
Very.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's our justification. But if you don't have the Spirit, can you still understand right from wrong?
You might understand correctly.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. You're gonna, go ahead.
We have a social contract with humans that if I don't get you, you don't get me.
It's still the golden rule.
Yeah, that's right. Now I want you to continue to think through these as we talk about some of the examples. Since we have a biblical worldview, let's go to the Bible. Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. I think he's right. It's true. We don't have to acknowledge God to know right from wrong. Romans chapter 1, let's start with verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them from God, made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or gave thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkness. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanges the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, birds, and four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over in their lust of their hearts to impurity, and their bodies might be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truths of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for the women exchanged the natural functions for which is unnatural. And in the same way, also men abandoned the natural function of the women and burned in their desire toward one another. Men with men committed indecent acts, receiving in their own persons the due penalty of the earth. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper. Sounds an awful lot like today. Okay. And a year ago, and 100 years ago, and 500 years ago, Gerald?
Sounds like we just had a report about intelligence on the enemy.
We had a little bit, yeah, okay, that's good, I like it. Here's the enemy. Here's what you're fighting against. Here's the other side of the equation.
And the enemy is me.
And the enemy is me? Yeah. Excellent. Because one of the beauties of a biblical worldview is that it doesn't require, a reduction. In other words, we don't have to look to the creation to worship or to serve. And especially the self. Where these people, we see them worshiping cows and worshiping statues and whatever. We tend to worship the self. As Darrell said. The biblical worldview accounts for and affirms the fullness of our unique human identity. So you look at the total of who we are as a people, as humanity. If we look to God, it answers all the questions. And if we don't look to God, then we're going to search for something. Okay? And when we search for something, we lessen ourselves, and we lessen the value that we build from self. Questions? Did I communicate that right? Do you feel like, that's why I said, we're going to think today. So we're going to look at how a secular worldview can never fully contain the cherished values that we take for granted. Okay? And if we, go ahead.
What reason has, with science help, answered that question is that everything is what we call an accident.
Yeah.
It had no reason, no cause, no purpose, it just happened. And it followed the rules of our physical world.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's their weakest point.
Yeah. So, let's talk about 4 things today. Morality. Who or what defines good and evil? 2, human equality. What makes people equal? 3, human rights. Where do they come from? Number 4, freedom. What makes it possible? So those are the 4 things we're going to talk about. So let's now talk about morality. Who or what defines good versus evil? Yeah. Okay. In a biblical worldview, problem is, there are a lot of people out there that they're not satisfied with that answer. Okay, they're just not.
So then it comes down to what the rule of the land.
Okay. You know, a secular worldview declares that we are free to be what we want to be and do what we want to do. There's no moral lawgiver with the authority to define morality for everyone. Yeah.
You can't legislate morality.
You can't legislate morality. Okay, so, yeah,
We define it ourselves.
we define it. That's right. But your definition of morality, your definition of morality, your definition of morality, and mine, I mean, it's just, you know, as individuals, we have no objective basis for telling another individual what's good or what's evil. So if Tom and Joe sit down on Tuesday and define what's right and what's wrong, and they show up next Sunday and they say, this is what we've decided, what are you all gonna say?
Depends on what they.
It's your opinion.
That's right. It's like, okay, that's nice,
Who
but
are you to tell me to do that?
who are you to tell me to do that?
That's your opinion.
That's your opinion. That's right. Go ahead, Jim.
The evil one wants us to have those independent opinions because it throws us into chaos. And in chaos, he conquers.
Yeah,
You're conquered when you're in chaos.
that's exactly right. And then that's, and the point is, Joan and Tom showed up next Sunday. And they start laying out the morality according to T&J. What we'll just say called TJ morality. Now, some of us, you know, there are those of us that think a whole lot of these two. And we might just fall right into place. I'm okay with that. They're both smart people. I've known them a long time, you know. So what happens is morality gets defined by consensus. What's everybody in the room think? And then it's like, well, then it's our job then to go out and get, you know, the people at, you know, Pure Paper Mill place them a breakfast. We've got to make sure they get on board. And then because it's all by consensus. There's no authority. It's what can we agree to? Or what can I, this is a big word, what can I force you? Because if we don't get a consensus, Joan and Tom might just get enough people that they can force it on the rest of us. A biblical worldview defines what is good and what is evil based on who God is and what He wills for us. I don't need a consensus. I don't need people to tell me, because God already has. He is the authority. Christians should recognize that anyone can behave morally because the moral law of God is written on our hearts by the Creator. That's Romans chapter 2, 14 and 15. See, it's kind of a continuation of the same thought of what we read earlier, just a couple lines later. Romans 2, 14 and 15. For when Gentiles who do not have the law do instinctively the things of the law, these, not having the law, are a law to themselves, is that they show the work of the law written in their